Hello, and here's a very hearty welcome to yet another short presentation on professional opportunities for chartered accountants. And this is in the space of internal controls over financial reporting. So, how are we going to go through this very brief 20-minute presentation? I'll walk you through the context, the objective, the methodology, who could be a potential client, and for any questions or queries that you may have, you may please write to me on sripriya@spka.in. I'm your presenter for this session and my name is Sripriya Kumar. So many a times we're called upon or we might want to approach for work on internal financial controls over financial reporting. I'm sure most of you recollect that there was an amendment consequent to which auditors are also required to report on internal financial controls with reference to financial statements, which was brought about in Section 143 of the Companies Act. And Section 134 also defines what the term internal financial controls mean. I had explained to you earlier, this entire focus of statutory audits and this entire perception of this audit profession has changed from merely an audit of the output financial statements to an audit of the process that ultimately leads to these financial statements and internal financial controls, which you can do on a self-read mode, is a very important component to ensure that your financial statements are free from material misstatements. So IFC in this context of 134 means the policies and procedures which are adopted by the company for ensuring orderly and proper conduct of their business, safeguarding of assets, preventing frauds and errors, and processes that would enable the timely preparation of reliable financial information. Now, where all do you find references to IFC? Section 134 says the board has a responsibility to ensure that there are proper internal financial controls. Section 177 talks about the role of the audit committee, where such audit committees are mandated for certain classes of companies. Section 149 says that the independent directors should satisfy themselves. And Rule 85 of the Companies Accounts Rules talks about the details in respect of adequacy of internal financial controls with reference to financial statements. So, as such, the IFC is a pretty strongly embedded concept in the entire chain of a company's recording to reporting or even business process to reporting. Now, we're talking about here engagements whereas a statutory auditor. So, in terms of this presentation, who would it be helpful to? It would be helpful to a statutory auditor who is required to comment on the internal financial controls of our financial statements. These templates would be useful to anybody who's trying to do an internal audit with reference to a risk control matrix. This engagement would also be very helpful to those people who would like to take up engagements as standalone engagements on internal financial controls also. So the statutory auditor cannot build the IFC template. So obviously either the management have to do it or they would give out this kind of engagements to other practicing professionals to develop these templates. So IFC, the internal financial controls of a financial reporting applies to one person, small companies and companies which meet this particular threshold. Please remember there is one more clause. If the company has defaulted in the annual financial statements, etc., to such category of companies also the IFC applies. So please read this notification very carefully. Now, in this whole journey of IFC, ICAI has also issued a guidance note. Now, this entire internal financial controls templating deals with risks and controls. I'll show you a sample template which you'll be able to appreciate towards the end of this presentation. Now, the guidance note does not say this is how you have to, prepare or validate your IFC template. It says it's a benchmark internal control system which is based on suitable criteria and is essential to enable the management and auditors to assess and state the adequacy and compliance with the system of internal control. There are many, many frameworks that can be applied. For example, COSO is one of them. Now, the relevant benchmark you must also refer to SA 315. Now, finally, all work that you perform in the control space talks only about these four things. You have a financial statement component, for example, fixed assets. You have processes linked to such components. And if it's an addition asset, it's an addition, a deletion, a depreciation, etc. You have risks in those components. What is a risk? Risk is anything that can be misstated, right? Anything. The risk of something going wrong. The probability of something going wrong is a risk. Yes, it can go wrong, correct? Fixed assets could get lost. That's a risk. The management needs to have a control system in place to mitigate such risks. And there are two things about controls which you typically assess in an IFC. Does a control design exist and is it good? For example, for loss of assets, you might have a very strong security procedure. That's a control. Similarly, you do physical verification. That's a control. That's a control design. Now, management says you must have security rotation, etc. That's control design. But typically, if you go on a particular day, you see all the security is absent. That's an operating effectiveness issue. So today, as a person who's building an IFC template, you will ensure that control designs, whatever is there with the management, are actually put in place, and such operating effectiveness of controls is also tested. So there are two parts. Now, what is internal financial controls over financial reporting? It's a process designed to provide reasonable assurance, and it includes the following mainly: pertaining to the maintenance of records should be properly maintained, reasonable assurance that transactions are recorded as necessary to permit the preparation of financial statements. You need to be able to, your controls must be such that they will be able to record all the transactions properly, that they will permit the preparation of financial statements in accordance with GAAP. Receipts, expenses, etc. are undertaken only in accordance with authorization, and provides reasonable assurance on regarding the prevention or timely detection of unauthorized acquisition use. So primarily controls over frauds. So you have frauds, errors which are embedded in your IFC requirement process. Now the guidance note also specifically says, look, how do you actually do it? There are four stages to it. How do you work on an IFC engagement for a client? There's planning, there's design and implementation, there's operating effectiveness, and there's reporting. Now, as an auditor, or as an auditor for me to assess, or as a consultant for me to enable, first of all, I start with planning. Okay, what are my big items most important for my IFC coverage? Why? Because finally, your audit reporting is on free from material misstatement. So obviously, you will take the big components. You will identify the business process, understand the business process. You will identify what are the big risks there, what is the control that is there to prevent the risk, and whether such controls are manual or automated controls. Then you will go into the design and implementation. You assess the design of the control. Is it good? Assess the implementation. So this is control design, operating effectiveness, and then you will test. Now you will test basically for operating effectiveness, because the management has said, okay, this control design exists. There is, let's say, a standard operating procedure, or maybe it is not documented, but there is a business convention or a business practice which exists. So that gets documented in your IFC that it exists. Then you test the operating effectiveness. How do you test operating effectiveness? Essentially by performing audit procedures, audit testing. What testing will you do? Substantive procedures, compliance procedures, enquiry, confirmation, reperformance, recomputation, observation. All the same audit procedures. You will validate whether those controls are indeed operating effectively. And finally, reporting. Assess, that is largely for the statutory auditor. After doing all this testing, see, the template is provided by the management and the testing is done by the auditor. You will assess the impact on audit opinion. Form an audit opinion on the financial statements. For example, my company has no records for inventory properly. So neither is there a control design, nor is there operating effectiveness. It will result in a not a clear audit opinion on this component. So when you do an internal financial control template, you have an entity level and a component level assessment. Now, I'll take you through an illustrative template. Now, what is the scope for a CA to assist in this IFC? First time template. Some managements may want to, just for the first time, statutory auditor will say, please give me your template. What is your IFC template? So the management may want to engage a consultant to do this, and you could be it. So the first time template, enhancements to template, support in management testing, and support in auditors testing. Sometimes even the statutory auditor can take one more person to help them, right? So you could test on behalf of the auditor. So there is a scope to assist in all of the above domains or segments in the IFC process. Now this is again from the guidance note, and it talks about the top-down approach. You don't go and start how will you do your IFC from a voucher? No, it has to come from the top. What is my financial report? What are my assertions? What are my business cycles? By business cycles, we commonly talk about order to cash, procure to pay, hire to retire, and other processes as may be necessary. You have sub-process and you have activities within these sub-processes. Now, how do you approach it? So first is you understand the scope of work. So from now on, I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of somebody who's going to build the template. What is my scope of work? What are the business processes that your client wants you to cover? This year they might say just do order to cash properly, which is from the time a customer gives me an order to the time it gets converted back to a payment for me after I finish my sales as an organization is the order to cash cycle. Then you build the template and then you test and report. So this is your broad approach. Now, if you've listened to my earlier videos, I've just put out some processes: procure to pay, order to cash, fixed assets, production, statutory compliance, etc. These are only illustrative components and subcomponents. Now, let us take one small case study. You're asked to build and test an ICFR template for the procure to pay function of a manufacturing organization. How would you go about it? So the first thing I have to understand is, okay, the client is talking about procure to pay. I take you back to the same 4 box that we always talk about: risks, controls, control design, operating effectiveness. So now we have decided procure to pay is the process I want to build the IFC for. I need to understand what are all my activities in procure to pay: vendor empanelment, master data, limits of authority, need to request, you really need to buy it, requisitions, quote to award. So somebody gives a PR to the purchasing function. The purchasing function asks for quotes from vendors who are empaneled. You raise purchase orders. There could be contracts in addition to purchase orders, fixed price agreements. These contracts can go through changes, right? Purchase order amendment is very, very important. There's a very general rule that nobody can amend something that he has signed. So if the PO, let's say, has been signed by GM Purchase and GM Finance, if it's for an amendment, it has to go to the next level. It could be the Director Purchase and Director Finance who have to sign off on that PO. Then materials or services start coming and they get certified. There could be rejections, supplier invoicing, payment, and MIS. Now these are the activities in a typical purchasing function. And how do you evaluate? Your control design would comprise of the policy. The company should have a purchase policy, organization chart, how is my work getting delegated, standard operating procedures, what is the IT platform, operating effectiveness, you have your data analysis, etc. And you do your transaction testing by performing audit procedures. So these are typically what would comprise in a template for procure to pay. I had done an illustrative template. We had spoken about reconciliations, vendor masters, schedule 3, vendor selection, rate contracts, etc. See, some of this might be slightly larger than internal financial controls over financial statements. But I have decided to put this in primarily because it's very helpful for us to understand the whole gamut. Now, the idea is you build a master template and then you identify only those that impact financial reporting. What are those that impact financial reporting? You go back to the guidance note. So, only those that attack these three important aspects are the ones that are finally taken for your formation of audit opinion. Now, I will show you a template where I will walk you through an Excel presentation of how exactly a template is done for the procure to pay process. Now, this is a typical template of the procure to pay process. What all does this template comprise? It comprises of the various processes that I spoke about: reconciliation, vendor master database, schedule 3, vendor selection, etc. Sub process: what is the risk? What is the control description? Who is the process owner? What is the control frequency? What is the access control? What's a typically good control? You will write it here. Access control. Is the control a preventive control or a detective control? Is it a manual control or an automated control? What are the details of the tests performed by you? Is there a design deficiency that you need to communicate to the client saying, look, you don't even have a control design? Control design effectiveness. Is it a good control? What is the current control evidence? Operating effectiveness. Is it good? Not good? What is the sample I have taken? And what is my annexure reference? And for each test, you will have a separate testing template. So let us take one example. Let's take reconciliation. Relevant accounts are not reconciled to subledgers and returns. It's a big risk, right? Your supplier will think you have to pay him 2 crores, whereas in your books it is only 1 crore 20 lakhs. So what's a good control description is a monthly reconciliation and circularization of balances. Who should it be done by? It should be done by the finance person in the accounts payable team. So we'll put finance executive. Control frequency should be monthly. Access control description done annually. Is it a preventive or a detective control? It is both. It is actually detective. Manual or automated. Presently we are doing it manually because we ask for an account statement from the client. Details of testing. Reviewed financial year 2021 confirmations. I got only 30% confirmation and verification. Design deficiency? Yes. Why? Because 1 year is too long a time frame. Control design effectiveness? Yes, the design is good. Design again can be improved. The current control evidence. This is the FY 2021 statements that you have reviewed. Sample. Now you say I took 30 confirmations and reconciled books with reference to confirmations. Operating effectiveness? Yes. So this is just a very simple high-level example, but it's a very powerful test because it tells you that you have period end reconciliation processes. So any mismatches can be identified and that your accounts payable balances are properly stated. This is just an illustration of a broader concept of an internal financial control. Now, is this a must? Not necessarily, because you can perform other audit procedures and you may have other procedures for a client to ensure that the account balances are indeed reconciled. So this was just an example of a template. I take you back to the PowerPoint. So with this, it's a very short presentation on how an IFC template is built. And if you have any questions or queries, please reach out to me at Sripriya at spk.in. I'd be very happy to share with you this procurement template just as a guidance for you to start your work. So stay tuned and have a very, very nice day ahead. And thank you so much for this patient hearing.